All right, so we are at 6 o'clock. Can everyone see me all right? A few thumbs up, waves, that'd be great. Yeah, I love that. That's great. Am I also sharing right now? Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. Anyone would think I'd never done a Zoom call before during the pandemic, which is great. So just wanted to start off today with talking about a welcome from AIM Technologies. My name is James Coben. I will be your host today. I'm joined by Emiliano Bina from AIM, and we'll do some introductions as we go through. Today's conversation, it's predominantly going to be a live demonstration, but we've got a few slides in any kind of conversation to start things off. And we're going to start to look at Race Studio 3 analysis. Just like many of you, I've been using Race Studio 2 analysis for as long as I've been using AIM devices. And that's been quite a while now. So this is the next iteration and evolution in the software. We will focus predominantly today on the basic sort of introduction, quick navigation into the actual software itself, and some housekeeping from that point of view. So that's the purpose of today. Now, we won't cover everything today, as you can probably imagine. This is going to take some time, but at the same time, we will do a series of these over the next few months, addressing certain key topics, because I'm sure many of you have played with the software, some of you may not, some may be using it all day, every day, and so we want to be able to address that going forward. Hopefully today will take about an hour. The meeting scheduled for an hour and a half, although hearing me blab on for an hour and a half is probably nothing worse. And so as a result, we'll try and keep it to the hour to keep it on track. Now, just to start the conversation off with a little bit of sort of introduction. I don't work for AIM. I am a partner of AIM's. I've worked with AIM now for the best part of about 10 years. Just like many of you, I am a race car driver. I live here in the United Kingdom. I drive a Formula Ford these days, which is fun, but I spent a lot of time in the US driving sort of BMWs. And so got an interesting sort of experience of all sorts of different cars, some of which had ECUs passing data into the system. Others, just like the car I have now, is I think older than the internet itself. And so as a result, the setup that I've got is slightly different. But as a result, all of these have given me a great set of experiences. And I found myself in a situation where I figured out how the software worked a number of years ago, created a series of YouTube channels of videos, because I get asked a lot of questions, same question over and over. So I thought, you know what I'll do? I'll create some videos for people so that I don't have to answer the same question. Those questions kept coming from people, but at the same time, the videos existed. And so if anyone's sort of ever interested, I have a YouTube channel, so does AIM Shop, where you can go and find a lot of these sort of videos. And so my focus here is very much like many of you. I am a sort of an end user of the software, but, and I'm going to ask him to unmute himself, Emiliano's on the call as well, who, unlike me, does work for AIM and is the architect of this software. And so as we go through Q&A at the end, I think he may be somebody who can help with some of these sort of questions. So Emiliano, I'd love to introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me here. Welcome everybody. My name is Emiliano. I've been working for AIM since the last 20 years. I've been the developer of Race Studio 2 analysis software, of a part of a Race Studio 3 software, and I'm now working at the Race Studio 3 analysis software. In the meanwhile, I work also at the Drag Analyzer software. I'm the main developer also of that. What to say about me? Nothing. Let's the software speak for me.
Okay, fantastic. Well, it's lovely to have Emiliano here, because we've been doing a series of these webinars. I'm sure many of you have tuned into some of the ones done by AIM Sports, which is the US folks. They've been doing these since the pandemic started. So they've been doing one a week. At the point they were doing 2 a week, which was quite a lot of content to consume. And Emiliano's been probably involved in nearly all of those. And so it's nice to be able to do one here in the UK. So without further ado, just wanted to be able to talk about sort of a bit of housekeeping. I never know what words to use here. Housekeeping oftentimes seems like an unusual term to use here, but if you wouldn't mind just keeping yourselves on mute, let's keep the questions and answers flowing in the chat box, because there are people on the call who can answer the questions, Emiliano being one of them. as we go through. We'll have a time at the end to be able to address any questions that may not necessarily have been answered. And yeah, we want to be able to go through this. Now, mostly live demo, but I did want to start the conversation off with thinking about a few things, because this is what we're going to cover today. And then we'll do other aspects of the conversation. So the first thing is getting ready for the RStudio 3 analysis. Now, it sounds like a strange thing to say, but this is a beta software. And so the question is how do you use this in conjunction with your other softwares that you use, and just a few tips and things that I've experienced as a racer using this software. The next is going straight into the actual software itself, and we're going to have a look at the session library, the test database, because that's improved tremendously, and there's so much more information that is there, which gives us an opportunity to be able to sort of work that through. The next thing is looking at the track map. Now, that might seem like a strange thing to be able to have a look at next, but I'm in one of those sort of positions where I'm lucky enough to be able to see what people are really interested in from the RStudio 2 analysis software by nature of what people watch in terms of YouTube videos on a regular basis. And without a shadow of a doubt, beyond setting up an AIM solo, the second most popular video that is online is the how do I overlay my laps on Google Earth? Well, that's been built into the software now. Not only is it with Google Earth, but you can use it with all sorts of different mapping software. So we're going to look at what that actually looks like. Then we're going to have a look at one of the biggest enhancements that have been, talked about and asked for an awful long time, which is data and video being analyzed together. We're going to look at that and see what it looks like online. And then the last thing we're going to look at today is the time distance graph. It's probably the #1 screen that most of us use as we look at data analysis today and RStudio 2 analysis. Now, I'm aware that there's other channels, there's channels reports, math channels, profiles, all sorts of additional conversations. These will follow over time, but for now, we're just going to cover off on these because I think it gives us a nice introduction to be able to get going on these sorts of conversation. And so before we get into the demonstration, there's a few things which are really important, and I'll walk through some of these because they're very important. Some of you may or may not have used this, and I'll show where you can actually go and download the software. Now, the first is actually downloading the beta software. It won't replace the existing RStudio 3 you have today to be able to do your configurations and download the data that you have from most of the modern devices that come from AIM. And so it's important to know where to go and to find that software. So we'll just have a quick look at that. The next, and this is a really interesting part of the conversation, determine what data you'll use with RStudio 3 analysis. Because if you're anything like me, you might have an awful lot of data. You may have hundreds, if not thousands, of session files. And the question you have to ask yourself is, do you want to point the beta software at all of this data? Or do you want to select a subset of the data that you use and just use that to be able to analyze? Because that's kind of, a key sort of aspect of the use, which is right now, the use of the beta software, you could use it as your everyday permanent analysis software. But the question is, will you get all the functionality? Answer is not quite yet, but obviously with Emiliano here, you'll know that he and I talk about this all the time, which is a continuous sort of advancement. So the question is what data do you want to use to be able to actually know and get up to speed with the software? And then the last key component that's part of this as well is that you'll have to create a profile. You'll have to have an online presence now to be able to use the new beta software. So you'll have to be prepared to be able to set that up. It's quite an interesting part. Not only does it make providing feedback to AIM a cinch, a doddle, but it also means that there will be future enhancements that will come from this profile, whereby if you wanted to be able to share experiences or configurations between machines, all you'd need to do is be able to log in. And I don't know how many of you have downloaded a user profile on one computer and then uploaded it onto another. But certain things like that will be vastly improved. And so that's what we're going to look at today. And hopefully many of you will appreciate that. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to switch to my main computer. Now you should be able to see, hopefully, actually we have the faces. You should be able to see my computer screen. So quick thumbs up. Are you seeing sort of a picture of a person in a Formula Ford? Yep, great, thank you. Some people thumbs up there, which is great. So what we're going to do to start off with is we're going to go through those getting ready sort of parts of this. And so the first thing we want to have a look at is where to go. Now, most of you, I'm sure, in the UK or the international representation for AIM And the easiest place to be able to go and find this software is on aimshop.com. You just scroll down to the bottom and you'll find that there is an opportunity to be able to download the software there. So that's where you'll go to be able to go and find it. We'll make sure if there's a follow-up to this conversation that we link to that, but at the same time, that's where you go to be able to get the software that is there. Very straightforward, but at the same time, it's nice to know where to get it. Now, the next thing that we talked about is deciding what data you want to be able to use. And so this is an interesting part. Now, I'm actually going to sort of delve in. And as I said, this is my actual race laptop that I'm using here. It's full of all of the, well, I wouldn't call them secrets, but at the same time, it's full of all the data that I have and stuff that I use. And so what I have is I have set up a folder called Race Studio 3 Beta folder. And this is where I go and I download or I find any data and I just throw it into this folder. And this is the folder that I use for the beta software, rather than necessarily saying, I want to be able to link this to all of the data files they have. Now, you may be wondering, well, why have you done that? Well, chances are you probably appreciate that I get asked a lot of time to be able to analyze people's data. So I have thousands of files. And so being able to work that through in the new software might have necessarily added a lot of complexity. The next thing that I also wanted to be able to do was to be able to always know where I could go and find files and move things around. And so I'll show you as we get in the software where that is. But one of the things that I'd recommend, just to give you an idea, if I load up the old Race Studio 2 software, the things that we use every day, it's just loading up right now. It's as simple as one of the things that you may or may not want to be able to do is what I generally tend to do is if I want a file, I click there, I click on export, and then I just pick the new folder that I want. And I would, for example, just drop it straight in here. So it's as simple as that, choosing the data that you want to be able to use. Now, if you've also got a SmartyCam, and one of the key benefits of the Race Studio 3 analysis software will be you can marry together the data and the video into one unit, is that the best way to be able to make sure that the Race Studio 3 analysis is finding both your video and data is to throw that all in the same file. And so similarly, if you go back into here, you can see that if I scroll through here, I've got data files and I've also got video files. This means that it's all in the same place. So when we import them into the Race Studio 3 analysis software, it's all there available to us. And so again, this might seem pretty basic and straightforward, but I have to tell you that it makes life easier if you want to be able to manage the test, because effectively that's what we're doing. We're trialing the software, we're figuring out what we need to do. Now, if you did in fact want to be able to link it to all your data, you're welcome to do that as well. It's user preference, but that's just a sort of a little tip that we have to start off with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close that down and I'm going to actually now go straight into the beta software itself. Now, this is the view that you have when you actually load up Race Studio 3 analysis and you click on this little icon that is here. This is the icon which is new, and this is the one you're going to be using as we go through the conversation with today and looking at it. Now, interestingly, you'll notice that my Race Studio 3 little icon is illuminated. You can only have one instance of Race Studio open at one given time. So if you use the regular everyday production version, you can have that open for uploading your configurations, for doing whatever you need to do. Similarly, if you're just testing out the beta software, you have to close that and open up the beta software. And you'll notice the beta software because it'll show up in a nice little gold icon here instead of the standard one that looks here. So always be loading this if you want to be messing around and working on testing this out and making sure you know how to use the software. Once you load it up though, this is what shows up and you get this nice little button here. You also get a few other bits. Remember I talked about the fact that you're going to get a profile. So here, for example, you can see that this is my profile. It gives me the opportunity of sending feedback directly to AIM, and it just gives me an opportunity to be able to log into multiple machines. And so again, another nice enhancement there. It's not the color of my crash helmet, but at the same time, close enough in many respects. And then the last thing I do is if you've downloaded this before in the past and haven't necessarily updated it lately, this is an iterative process. This is something which is constantly going and improving. And so one of the things that I'd recommend is that you click on this little icon here, which you're probably all familiar with, and notice that I've actually got some firmwares which I haven't downloaded. I left those there so we're all comfortable with what this little arrow means. But at the same time, make sure this one here is always the most up-to-date and the latest version being used, because I would say that I'm often caught out with updates, and every time you submit feedback and every time you have a conversation being able to say, how does this work? It gives Emiliano a chance of being able to put out a new release. And if you're ever wondering what's on the new release, just click on this button and it'll tell you all of the updates. And so enough chatting about the setup and everything. Again, you're probably all very comfortable with this. Let's get into the actual analysis itself. So we're going to click here. And this is, we call it your test library, your test database. This is where all of your files are. Now, you'll probably notice that I actually have many that are already populated here. And one of the things you may remember earlier is that I said, well, I don't necessarily want to be testing it with all the software. In fact, what I'd like to do is just test it with a few sample tracks that I've actually been using. And so to do this and to bring the software in, you click on this little gear icon here. And then you can click on this button that says import. Now, if you remember, I said, put it into a folder that you can easily manage and work with. If you click here on import folder, you can nominate and select the folder that you've created where you're storing all of your test databases, sorry, that's the wrong word, all your session files, and it will just import them all in and organize them neatly in this system there. Now, you can import singular files as well if you wanted to, but I find just updating and importing that folder just makes life so much easier if you want to be able to bring in some new files to work with. And so that's how to get the data into the system. Now, this is the interface. This is a new view. It's very similar in many respects, in some areas, to other aspects of Race Studio 3. For example, if you happen to be somebody who's good at managing tracks and has sort of a different track database or setup, for example, if you've got lots of different configurations, the same process exists and the same sort of view where you can have your recent sessions, you can set up your collections as to, this was my racing from 2020, this was my racing from 2021 or whatever need be. All of those sort of configuration views are set up. And this, on the left-hand side, is all of the events that are here. So I have 49 sessions that are split over, best part of probably 12 or so different instances. So it's all grouped together in this scenario, organized by the date, which is the filter that I have here, and then how many sessions are by that date, and then it just gives a little information about what was going on. So you can see that I'm a Formula 4 driver. I did get given a little bit of new data to play with for today's demonstration, so you'll also see there's a bit of radical that's in there. But generally speaking, these are all the sessions that I have, varying in terms of the experiences that I've had and the data I wanted to bring in. So first things first, data is organized on the left-hand side in terms of all of your sessions that you can then start going to work with. And so as you see, I can click through here and say, I was at Castle Combe. I was there over a couple of days, which were grouped together. These were some test days. In fact, I think this was a race weekend. Or test days. I can see, for example, down here, anyone who's driven Formula 4 knows that we have something called the Walter Hayes Trophy that comes up every year. There's and a mass of sessions that we do there. In fact, I actually did 20 over that test and weekend. And so they're all grouped together here. And all the data is sort of available in these different formats. Now, that's how you sort the data. It's pretty straightforward in terms of looking through and finding sort of your particular session. And all of this will capture the information that you set up when you downloaded the data. So you probably said, this was me, I was driving my race car, which is, in this case, Formula Ford 1600 Championship, and this was race, or this was qualifying. And you can see that when we now move into looking at the details of the actual sessions, all that information is available here. So I've got one of my fellow drivers' information here, plus I've got my own. These were obviously races that were here. There was a bit of qualifying. It was at Castle Combe. Now, lots of options to be able to work with right now. But before we even get there, I did want to start pointing out some other pieces of information that are associated with the test files. The first is this icon here. This one right now is showing this little square with the data line, or sorry, data line. I'm giving the answer away right now, giving the little sort of squiggly line. These are data files. And these are effectively just if you've got an AIM Solo, for example, or an AIM Solo 2, and you've just got data, or you actually capture data and you don't have a SmartyCam, this is what all your files are going to look like. Now, if, for example, I scroll up here and I get into this, large list of files here from Silverstone, you'll notice that I also have this little icon here, which looks like a movie clipboard in terms of, this is a movie. I mean, it's the universal icon for films. And so this file, for example, is a movie file instead. And then if the system is working all together, now these were files on two separate systems, but if you've got a system that's set up whereby the same data and the SmartyCam are all talking on the same system, you have one final view that shows up, which is this little icon that will show up here. If you've got a SmartyCam and a data file from the same session and same experience, Ray Studio 3 will bolt those together into one large universal file where you'll have not only the video, but all the data and the data channels that you had from that particular point. And so you can see that these files came from the MD of AIM Technologies, Stephen Lake. So you can see that we've got there a data file and a video file grouped together. And so it's important to be able to know that that's the first thing, to be able to get an idea of the different type of files that you have. And I'll talk about what's available in each of these in just a minute, but it's pretty straightforward. This one's data, this one's video, this one's information grouped together. Now, throughout this, you've noticed that as I've clicked on certain different parts of this, information has changed. Now, one of the things that happens for me, and I'm sure it happens to you, is that the details behind each of the sessions often requires you to open up the session. Was it that one I did that lap time in? Was this the one where I had that particular sort of slow lap, fast lap? Was this where I did my best lap time, whatever need be? Well, in the new Ray Studio 3 analysis, you've also got a way of being able to sort through some of the information on the particular file. So for example, if I picked this file here, this generic testing file that we have, let's hope it, there we go. Just takes a bit of a moment to think about what's going on. You can see that if I now hover down here, we've got a lot more information associated with that. So I can see in this particular session where I did that file. I can see information such as how that file did versus the others. If I wanted to be able to view, I can change these, by the way, to other variables. And that's going to be user preference, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But one of the things you can sort through here is you can see information about the particular session. And so you can see, well, this is right now sorted by slowest time to fastest time. But if I wanted to sort it by, let's click here, the lap numbers last first or first last, you have all these ways of being able to view the data as you want to be able to have a look at it. So it's a nice way of being able to sort of sort through your particular laps and be able to find information you're looking for. This chart on the right-hand side shows that these lap times were quite consistent as well. So I'm sort of sitting here quite proud of my lap sessions that I have here. But in general, that's where that is. So it gives you a way of being able to sort through the data in your file. Now, there's a few other things on here which are particularly useful. You can just have a quick view of the file. If I hovered over here, I could see, well, each time I hover on this lap time here, I can see where it is on this overall sort of amalgamation of laps. But one of the most important things that we have here in this particular database, I personally like, is one key variable, which I'm sure most of us never, ever remember to write down when we're at the track, which was, what was the weather like that day? And it sounds like a bonkers thing to say, right? We're there and we're starting to work, but at the same time, unless it was a deluge and we see the lap times are representative of a wet versus dry lap, how do we know if it was 25 degrees centigrade or 4 degrees centigrade, which interestingly enough, it feels like through the whole of April here in the UK, we've had days like that where it's been freezing in the morning and lovely and warm in the afternoon. And so as we look at different variables for this session, we can click on many of these, but there's this nice little icon here that we can click on that will actually find the weather forecast for that particular day. I think this goes back 2 or 3 years, maybe even further, and tells you what the weather was like on that particular day. So you can remember when I did that lap time, was it a hot day or a cool day? Because oftentimes we find ourselves in a scenario, which I'm sure we're all there as racers, is that if we know the track's hot, we know the track's slow. But how hot was it? What was the condition like? What was the, was it windy? Was it dry? Was it cloudy? And so these are sort of additional pieces of information which are available for Race Studio 3, which will allow you to go in and start working with your particular data files. And so a nice way of being able to look at the information that you have. Now, we could talk on this page for absolutely forever, but I think that we'd run out of time and you'd all be bored and probably switching off. And so one of the things I'll say on this is start clicking all the buttons. The only way I figured out Race Studio 2 analysis was just clicking on all the buttons. But one of the things that I found with this is that this is a really nice way of being able to get different views and information about your data. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to click through and have a look at what happens when you double click in a session. Just like when you were in Race Studio 2 analysis, if I wanted to be able to have a look at this session, I just give it a double click and it would open up and it would give me all the information I'm looking for. Same sort of, quite a complicated file on that one. But the same thing is this with Race Studio 3 analysis. You can open it up using some of these buttons here. But generally speaking, I find the easiest way of being able to open a session is just to give it a double click. And the first thing you're going to see is a view that looks like this. And so the default view that you will see, now this, I might caveat, is a beta, so it might change over time, is you're going to see a lot of information grouped together. And one of the things that we spent a lot of time with Race Studio 2 analysis doing was being able to help people work out how to be able to create user profiles and views. And I have to be honest, sometimes it was quite complicated. Whereas today, with Race Studio 3 analysis, it's relatively straightforward and nice and easy to be able to see. So this is the default view you're going to be able to get. This is the time distance graph that's available. And so first and foremost, you're going to see certain key things that everyone sees. You're going to see the actual graph itself. You're going to see, this is now referred to as the storyboard. And you can see the laps that you have down here in this particular option as well, if you wanted to be able to load them. You're going to have this map, which you probably notice is, by the way, I don't know how many people knew that some tracks have got, sun farms in the middle of them. I had no idea that Castle Combe was mostly solar panels. I've never gone off track that far in those particular points to be able to find them. Hopefully I never will, but in essence, it just gives you a much nicer view in terms of what's going on. Plus the default will be all of the channels. Now, all of this will be configurable by you and how you want to be able to set this up. But before we get to the time sort of distance graph, I wanted to be able to talk about one feature that everyone seems to really like. I know I'm one of those, which is clicking up here on some of these buttons which load up new views. And so one of the things you'll see is this is your default view. We'll talk in future versions of this webinar as to how to really customize that view. I'll give you a sneak peek into some of my personal views in just a minute. But the one thing I wanted to be able to load first and foremost is this one. This one is called the track map. And all of a sudden you can see that the data files that you have will overlay your laps. It doesn't matter if you've got an AIM Solo 2, all the way through to the advanced data loggers and dashes that exist. It will load that lap that you've done on a mapping software, which is really nice to be able to see. And just like you'd want to be able to do, you can zoom in, check out your line, see what's going on. And it's a very nice way of being able to view the data. But instead of having to download the file, load Google Earth, upload the file into Google Earth, it's all available here right in front of you. And the other thing, which is particularly nice on this particular scenario too, is that you can also change the mapping provider. So if you're somebody who, well, I don't like Google Maps, I'd rather use Bing. You can just scroll down here on the list, and I click very fast. And so if I've done this too fast, I'll slow down. I consciously try and make sure I'm slowing down. If you click here on this little overlay button here, sort of like a stack of maps, you can see that you have a series of options to be able to put in there. So for example, if you wanted to be able to put it on Bing, this is what the Bing map looks like. And you can see that there may be some, you always have to question yourself, will I do it myself? Is that the mapping software, or did I inadvertently drive off track? And we'll never know, or will we? It depends on whether we look at some video. But you get a way of being able to see the laps, and you can pick more than one lap to be able to have a look if you go into this section here, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But this is a really nice feature which simplifies a lot of the experiences that people have had to go through with Race Studio 2 analysis, yet at the same time have really wanted that context as to how to see. And you've got lots of choices you can have a look at. Here, maps is a nice way of being able to have a look as well. I love the way here maps actually list what the circuit name is, just in case you forget, and lists it many times. But at the same time, it really does show you a nice way of being able to view that data that's available. So this is one of the key features that we find a lot of people actually like. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back now and I'm going to have a look at the time distance, because this is something that most people will probably use. If you've ever seen any of the videos that I've put online or anyone else puts online, generally speaking, we find ourselves looking at this particular graph more than any other that's available. And one of the things, first and foremost, is that we have to get to the point where we know what we're looking at. And this is not too dissimilar to what we've seen in Race Studio 2 analysis. You have things like your delta tool, you have your ability to stack these and number them. But the thing that I think is really important that we want to focus on is, first and foremost, how do I actually pick a channel that's actually showing? So right now you can see here, I've got GPS speed and RPMs. Well, here's your channels list, which you can click here and you can pick on any you like. So for example, if you happen to have an AIM solo and you've only got GPS data, and I can mimic that by just clicking on the RPM, it will move it to the left, to the right. So it's no longer bolded and it no longer appears on the list here. And as I scroll down, I can scroll down and say, okay, well, let's mimic what would be on a solo 2, for example. And I can say, well, I want longitudinal acceleration and I want to be able to see latitudinal acceleration as well. And so it will just start to add the lap times that you wanted to be able to have a look at on that particular map. And so there's the first way of being able to pick the particular graphs you're looking at. Now, one of the things you may be saying is, well, hold on a second, I'd like to be able to see that data and I want to be able to compare laps. Well, that's your next option, is if you want to be able to compare your laps, just click on the lap button here and pick the laps you want to be able to compare. So right now we've got one that happens to be shown up a 13.3. So I'm going to click on this one, 13.6. As soon as I click that, one of the things you'll notice is the graph changes slightly, and now you've got the overlay of both laps, but you've also now got the time comparison bar that pops in here. So you can start reading it in terms of analyze. You can see on this particular lap here, all things were pretty good until the second half, and then something went slightly awry and things sort of disappeared in terms of lap time. But at the same time, this is how you can start analyzing the data. But the other thing you'll also notice is you've also got this map down here, which also has this information, should you want to be able to determine what's going on. So one of the things that people loved or hated in the Race Studio 2 analysis was that you had to have a track map that would hover over the page. And if you had a little laptop with a laptop screen, like, well, where am I going to move that map to now? What you can do here is you can just click anywhere and it will move the dot to tell you where exactly you were. So if I wanted to see where I'd gone right or wrong here, if I click here, which is at this particular point in track, I can see that, oh, it just happens to be coming through. I was doing very well on the straight bits, but the corners, things went slightly awry, which seems to be the order of the day for me. And so as a result, you can see here that this is where things start to change. And you can zoom in on this map and you can decide how you want to be able to view the data and see all the information there. And it's a nice way of being able to see both the time distance information and the map at the same time. Now, throughout this, you've probably noticed that I haven't changed any of the view as to how things show up on the page, but you also have the option of being able to customize how this page looks. And I'm not going to necessarily do too much today, because this will be something that we focus on in later webinars, just for the essence of time. But one of the things that we used to do is, well, now I've got to have multiple windows, I'm going to resize them and move them around as we need to. Now what you need to do is to right click. And if you right click, I'm just using a right click of the mouse here. If you right click anywhere in the page, it gives you the option of adding or removing windows and moving them around. So I personally, some people absolutely love this storyboard at the bottom, and all power to them, because the beauty of data analysis is user preferences and how you use it. I'm one of those who never uses it. And so I can right click on it, click on remove the window, and all of a sudden it just makes the page slightly bigger. And now all of a sudden I've got the information that I was looking at, but in a better way of being able to see it on the screen. And I can also potentially resize some of these. So if I want to see that map a bit bigger, I can move that around. And I can adjust so much more than I used to be able to, just by dragging the mouse and picking up, just as we would do if we're comfortable with other types of software. It's a nice way of being able to customize and view the information in a slightly different format. So it's a nice way of being able to move your particular information around. So that's a quick view of what's happening here. So the one thing I'd recommend in this is that if you've got comfort with Race Studio 2 analysis, to start playing around with how you want to be able to view this data and be able to move it around. Because in many respects, it's a trial and error situation, and being able to figure out how to be able to use this is particularly interesting. So that's a quick view of the time distance. Now, one of the things that we've also talked about is the fact that we want to be able to look at the data and look at the video. And so we also have that option available to us as well. And I'm going to show you that in two particular ways. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to close this. Now, if I wanted to, and I didn't want to lose this information, if I just click on this little arrow here, and click Save the Profile As, I can name it something, and it will create a profile which keeps this for the next time I want to go there. So just like you'd use user profiles before, and you can see that I'm not going to do it because I've got loads that I've already created, but I've got all of these which I've created for this particular analysis. So for example, if I wanted to go in and say, I just want to look at Formula 4 driver, if I click there, it'll use this data file and find all of this particular information. And we'll talk through some of these particular profiles later on, but you can see it's customized it for the view that I particularly like to be able to use. And so have a play with that, and we're going to focus on that in later on webinars. But at the same time, just like user profiles, it allows you to be able to save the view you've just created. Now, I was talking about data and video, and again, this is the first view, and I'm going to look at it in two particular ways. The first is if you've got a SmartyCam, in the way that the data is housed and stored now, you have the option of being able to see basic data information from the SmartyCam file. But if you're lucky enough to have a file where it's clamped those together and you've got all of your additional channels that are coming maybe from your data logger and your SmartyCam, you can see that in more information. So we're going to look at those in both instances. The first thing we're going to do is just the SmartyCam file. And if I do that, you can see that the times are almost identical. I'm always going to take this SmartyCam file because clearly I was so much faster in this one, the 13.2. That's the one that we should always look at. The 13.3 is completely wrong. And you can see if I double click on that one, I've got a slightly different view that is opened up. Now, this is just data from the SmartyCam, but because it's connected to my system, it's also bringing in additional insights which are being logged, such as throttle, brake, and RPMs. And you can see that now when I select the laps that I have here, you'll notice that I get a different view and I can see a different lap. And so if I, for example, click on a second lap, now all of a sudden the two are together on screen and I can start looking at the data together. So one of the things that we were doing just a minute ago is we had a look at this data and we said, well, what happened at that particular point and what happened to that lap time? So what we're going to do is, we can load that up. We can see the lap times that are here. And we can say, okay, well, let's customize this a little bit to be able to see that view. And so I'm going to get rid of this, right click there, remove that window. That gives me a bit more sort of screen real estate that is there. I can also, for example, click on this little wrench icon that's up here. And I'm actually going to do it here and add a bit more sort of information I need to, but I don't. And so if I click here and I click on the play button, hold on a second, it's just having a bit of a moment. Now this might happen from time to time, and when it does, this is where you pick up the phone, talk to Emiliano, well I do anyway, and say something's happened or something's frozen. And if that does happen, we just generally tend to sort of share the experiences. And I think this is indicative of the fact that beta softwares oftentimes have a moment or two to be able to sort of freeze. And if this happens, usually what I do is I close program. I used to say to myself, hopefully we never get something that crashes on a demonstration, but now as this is a demo, I almost want it to happen because it's a beta, so it doesn't happen when it's in real life. And so that just happened. Apologies for the slight delay. Going to load that back up again, see if we can find that video file that we were just looking at and have another go. So here it is. And what we're going to do is just for a second, click on laps. And what I'd like to do here is if I click on that play button, now what you can see is you've got all sorts of information available to you all at the same time. Now, if I pause right there, this is where the data and video together is such a huge huge plus and advantage in terms of what we're doing. One of the key things that we've probably always asked ourselves is, was that me, the driver? Was that, you know, traffic on the fast lap, which is why that lap's there, and really starting to understand what happened in what particular point at which particular area on track. But the challenge is that we might have had, you know, one file over here, which might have been a video file. We have our data files over here. And then the question is, where exactly am I on track? Now, the beauty of this is that, you know, as you customize this view, you can see all of this information together at the same point and the same place on track. And so you can see that right now I've stopped this video on the main straightaway. This is the bit where I excel. And you can see that right now I am sort of doing 114 miles an hour, which is mirrored here with this particular information that is now on the data. And you can see that I'm just going through and getting on the main straightaway here at Castle Coombe, because you can see down here that I'm also at this particular point on the track as well. I'm a bit too crazy with my zooming there. And you can see there. So as you move this around, the videos move, the dot on the map moves, and so does the data. So now you can start really digging into what exactly happened on that lap and where did things go slightly wrong. And so you can see that there's a big sort of glitch that's happening here. So if I were to play the video here, I probably missed a shift or missed a point, and you can see what does that do. Now, if I pause the video, you can see that the RPM spiked here, which means that it probably didn't go in gear. You can see that the immediate drop in terms of speed, because I had that little spike. And now you can also see it in relation to where it happened on track and what was happening in the particular car. Now, this was just a test session, so there's no other cars around. But at the same time, if you were in a position of being able to say, was this me? Was this a car? What was I doing? Where was I positioned on track? This is a great way of being able to see that data merged together in a particular view that Race Studio 3 will allow you to be able to do. Now, oftentimes we get questions, which is, you can probably see, I'm going to let this play for a minute, just so you can see what's happening. Now, we often get the question that says, can I use a GoPro video to be able to do this? Or does it have to be a SmartyCam? Well, the answer is a SmartyCam for a very simple reason, that the SmartyCam is connected to the overall data logger and the setup, meaning that all of the data is joined together in what's often referred to, you see it mentioned in configurations, the CAN network, which is your AIM network within your car that connects together your loggers, your dash, your videos, everything into one now unique sort of experience where all of this data is housed together that you can analyze at the same time on track. And so it's a great way of being able to start working through and analyzing some of that data. So that's this view working through this particular information. So that's the first. Remember, I said I was going to do 2 ways of being able to view this data. That's the first. That's just the SmartyCam file. But if you just happen to have additional data that you want to be able to view as well, I'm going to close this file here. And I'm going to click on this one that I got given earlier on today, which is this combined data and video together. Both of these files are just housed in that Windows location, which I put in the Race Studio 3 beta folder. I just threw all the files in there this morning as they got sent to me. And Race Studio 3, if it finds the connective tissue between the files, which in some instances, it doesn't, and you can see some of my files are data here and video there. But if it finds both the files together, which 99% of the time it will, hopefully, you'll be in a position where it will merge those data files together. So if I double click on this session now, you're going to see not only am I going to be able to have the same view that I just had a look, notice that it's probably a much higher class of driving and racing and much faster with the Radical than my Formula Ford, but you can see that all the variables have changed. We now have Snetterton is on track. One of my tracks bucket list to be able to drive. I haven't driven yet, it looks fantastic. We've got the video that's up here, but now we've also got a lot more information available to us, which we can put into the particular graph. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move a few things around and for the purposes of demonstration, so I can show you additional information being viewed at the same time with the video. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this because I don't use it. And then what I'm also going to do is I'm going to pick some different channels to be able to analyze. So right now you can see that we have speed and we have RPMs. And so I want to be able to add a few more variables. So the first thing I want to be able to see is brake. So I'm going to click on that. And as I click on that channel, it moves from right to left and should populate in this file. Now, where did that go there? Did I click on it right, Emiliano? This is one of those moments where may have found something that causes the software to have a bit of a moment to think.
It's an undocumented
I find
feature.
myself just sort of tap dancing with some conversation while I figure out how to be able to make it work. But this one looks like it's caused a bit of a glitch, but we'll go back and do that because obviously it worked perfectly when I did the practice earlier on today. So let me just close this out. And we'll load that back up and have another go in just a second. Now, what I will stress, as I said earlier, this is still in beta. This is why, for me, you have a smaller subset of files. And right now, this is something you do with your data when you have a lot of time to be able to work through some of the kinks and areas that are there. But at the same time, know that this will happen. And I'll actually show you what would be really useful for Emiliano if that does actually happen as I load this up. So I'm going to load this RS3 back up, and I'm going to load up the analysis. Sorry, end of the day, running out of words. And I'm going to open up this joined file again. Now, if it does happen again, then it may be something. I'm not going to repeat the same exercise that I just did. If it happens to you as you're going through this, if you click on this little button here, you have this opportunity of sending the feedback to AIM. Now this gets sent, this is one of the reasons that we get that sort of login experience. It sends the bug or sends the scenario that you were doing straight through to Emiliano and to the software folks so that they can look at what was happening. And this is why I recommended at the beginning, you always go in and download the very latest version that's available, just in case this happens to happen going forward. And so that's a very nice feature for anyone who's looking to be able to say, look, this just keeps happening and I'd love it to be addressed. So I'm not going to do anything here. I'm just going to click on brake. And you'll notice that the brake pressure front, you got the front brake pressure just appeared here. It moved from left to right in the channels. And I'm also going to scroll down, and I think it's called TPS on this data file. Now I got this today earlier on. There it is. And so I can click on that one. One of the things you may have just noticed I've done, one of the nicest features, if you're someone like me who is a bit of a channel nut and you have loads of channels, and any of you who happen to be using this with sim racing like iRacing or anything like that, if you're using this software or iRacing, you get a delightful list of 73 channels to be able to work with. And so scrolling through those can take a lot of time. But if you know, for example, that a particular channel in this case is called throttle position sensor, all I need to do is go in here and type in the words and it will find that particular channel for you. It's so much easier to be able to the channels that you have in the setup. So I'm now going to click on it. It's going to move from right to left and illuminate nice and sort of bold. And now you can see all those channels overlaid against each other that are there. So now all of this information is available to be able to view. Now, if I go into the laps, I can pick another fast lap. This is quite a decent sized file of information that is here. So I think I'm just going to pick the next one because it looks relatively fast. And so now what we can see is that we have all these channels which are available in the channels list, available in effectively what's the measures graph. And you've got it in terms of where you are on the track and distance, but all of the additional channels that are there as well. So it just gives you that enhanced experience of being able to work through and navigate through many of these particular areas that are here. And so a lot of things to be able to work on, a lot of things to be able to figure out, but a lot of really exciting and interesting things to be able to customize and to create in relation to your sort of experiences that are there. And so that's really some of the key areas that we wanted to be able to cover today. Now, some of the things that I'm sure there's questions that are coming up and I'm going to address before we chat, before we get some Q&A and talk through some of these sort of things, is many people may be wondering about some of the things that are on here. For example, what are all these numbers that are here? Now, any of you who are familiar with Race Studio 2 analysis know that this is a AIM auto-generated segmentation of the track. In relation to green are straights, blue are left-hand turns, and reds are right-hand turns. And so what it's done is it's segmented the track so that you can do something which we all potentially have used before, which is do a split time analysis. So we can see what would our optimal lap time be if we wanted to be able to see how that works. Now, a lot of people are interested in this particular feature, and I know it's something that's slowly being developed over time. So I won't necessarily go into it in too much detail, but these type of segments here, and we'll cover this in the next seminar, will power some of the features that are here. For example, this button here, these split times now correspond to where they are on the map, and you can see them associated with those particular apps. Now, this is a huge, Steve must have been exhausted after he ran this particular session because there's just so many laps that are here, but you can see that what it'll do is it will start calculating certain pieces of information on the split times based upon those straights, left hand and right hand turns that are there. So it just starts getting you into split times, but we could spend a whole hour how to configure and set up and be able to work through those. So this is something that you may want to be able to sort of potentially work with over time. And so a lot of people are often interested in terms of what those particular variables are associated across the top and how they work. Similarly, there are other aspects which I would recommend, and I said I don't work for AIM, so I might never get invited back to do a webinar again, but I would say the math channel section is one that is an area that's being developed, and so it's one that I would say in the next few weeks probably start to be able to work on, but at the same time, if you're comfortable with math channels, there is an option to be able to do those, but they're also something that's slowly being developed, and so I would, you know, feel sort of a little bit sort of, you know, those are still being worked on type of things. But hopefully today, more than anything else, this has given you sort of like a glimpse into, once you've started to create your own personal configuration and view, that you can really start to get a very simple one-page view of everything that is happening with your data associated with where you're positioned on track, what you're doing on the video if you have a smarty cam, and if you've ever thought, should I get a smarty cam? I have to say it's one of the best training tools that I've ever used. In fact, most of the analysis that I do in the time between sessions is looking at video now rather than data. The fact you can now bolt it together with the data analysis adds a huge amount of sort of value as well. And so I'm going to stop there, conscious of time, and see if we've got I just happened to glance up at the chat box, and there are 48 different things that are happening there. So I'm going to stop right there and see, you know, what's happening and whether we've got some questions and answers that we may want to answer live. So let's have a look here as we go through. One of the things I will say, based upon the fact that we have a nice number of people here and probably everyone's going to yell at once, if anyone wants to ask a question live, I'm happy to see if we can answer those as well as we go forward. Just don't all shout at once, I would say, just in case we have quite a large list. But anyone wants to come off mute and ask a question, happy to be able to either fudge the answer or have Emiliano answer it with confidence and accuracy.
Yeah, I'll start us off if that's okay. It's Dave Langley here, motorcycle racer, clubman level. I'm currently running an MXL2 dash with the Smarty Cam, and I don't seem to be having data clamping itself together with the video as you put it. Is there any basic checks I can do to make that happen?
Yeah, so Emiliano, I'll let you answer that one as well, but my recommendation, I have the same challenge. That is exactly what I have working right here. So for me, and I can relate to that, if you look at this particular file here, I have this is working, and the way that it's been diagnosed is that we may be in a situation where the whole CAN network is not necessarily recognizing one of the components that's through it. The recommendation that was given to me, and we're still yet to test this, and it'll happen next time around, is make sure that the firmware is updated. It's just a strange thing to say, but make sure all the firmware is updated on all the devices to be able to see if that can work. Beyond that, Emiliano, I don't know if there's any sort of recommendations you can give as well.
My main recommendation would be to ensure all firmware are up to date, as you said, and to go into the SmartyCam settings and ensure that the video metadata are enabled, so to allow the data stream into the MOV files. that should be streaming into the MOV files, mainly the GPS positions. So for RS3 analysis to be able to link to the same GPS positions available in the XRK files.
Okay, I've done the firmware, so that should be okay now, but I'll go through and make sure I've got that metadata selected as well.
Yeah, anyway, in case we can chat also via by an email. If you send us an email, we can diagnose a little bit more. Our email is software@aim-spotline.com. Or
would you mind just typing that into the chat for me, Emilio?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Awesome, and then I'll copy it down from there.
Okay, I'll be doing it just in a second.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome.
Brilliant. We've got some other questions here. Gerhard asks, can I plug my SmartyCam into an MXK10 5th gen? Emiliano, you probably know the answer to that one. I don't know that.
I think so, but I do not remember now if the MXK10 it's a logging system or I know it's a plug and play, but I don't know if it's a logging system. So I don't know if it's generating XRK files. For sure, if you stream data into the SmartyCam and if you allow metadata to be recorded into the MOV file, you can have the video analysis that James just shared some minutes ago.
If you want me to jump in there, Emilio, it's James from Aim Shop. Yes, it will work with the MXK10, but as I've just put in the as a chat there, you will need the data hub as the GPS. Will also need to go into the data hub as well. So it's the data hub on our shop. It's just a £40 item. I'll put the link in as well. But the SmartyCam and GPS will go into that, and that goes into the 5-pin CAN expansion that's on the back of the MXK10, and it will all work perfectly.
Okay, thanks, Jay.
Cool. We've got, I think we've probably answered all the questions on the chat. And I know we're coming up on the hour, which is great. But what we'll do is we'll probably do another webinar within, probably we're going to try and do these once a month, starting to get into some more detail in terms of looking at how do I customize and configure my own personal view? How do I save user profiles? How do I do the split times report with the segments? One of the things that I'm loving is the fact that you can actually name some of the segments. So instead of saying, oh, that's corner number 1. And it's interesting, when I lived in the US, corners were all numbered. And you just had to know which number of which track where you are. But now I live in the UK, all the corners have got names. And so you can actually name, and there's a few things you can do. So we'll add a lot more sort of like the configuration as we go forward in terms of looking at it. And then at the same time, configuration and analysis are very different things. And so we may focus on some sort of analysis as well. And so, I think that the most important thing as we come to the close of today's conversation more than anything else is to know that there are a few great resources that you can get all the information that you need. Now, the first and the best place to start, I would recommend, it's beautifully clean and nice to be able to navigate, is aimshop.com. That will be a nice place where you can go and just find whatever you're looking for, links to these webinars, a lot of content. It also has got some links to other resources. The next few other places, I don't know how many of you are Facebook users. Sounds like a strange thing to say. It's rather like how many people of us, use cars or whatever it may be. But in many respects, there's great social media presence for AIM in sort of 2 areas. The first is the official from AIM conversation, but at the same time, there is an AIM users group, which was originally set up by AIM Sports US, but has now got a global sort of footprint where you can get most of your questions and conversations or answers. There's thousands of people in those particular groups. And then the other place that I'd also probably look at, it's not a, it's probably a shameless plug, and I apologize for this, but if you go to YouTube, you'll be able to find my channel is just simply my first name, last name, surname, sorry. But more importantly as well, there are also AIM Academy videos on AIM Shop's YouTube channel, plus there are loads of other AIM official sort of sites as well that are there. But my recommendation more than anything else, just give it a whirl. It's to a point where I would put some sample data files in a folder on your computer and just point RayStudio 3 analysis to it and have a play around with it. Yeah, feel free to ask any questions. James, I don't know if you've got an email address where people can send in any further questions or comments. I don't know if you can put that in the chat or something for people to be able to sort of comment as well.
Yes, I'll drop our email in there. Probably the best thing is if we don't get through all these questions you've all got is just send us an email and one of our sales guys will get back to you probably in the morning now. Unfortunately, they're all part-time, but yes, no, we'll get back to you in the morning with any answers or any questions you've got.
Brilliant. So we're at 7 o'clock exactly UK time. Thank you all very much for attending. Emiliano, I didn't know if you had any closing sort of thoughts or comments, but otherwise we'll say thanks and look out for the next webinar.
I thank you all for having me here, and thank you for attending this webinar.
Thank you, Emiliano.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah,
Cheers,
thanks all. Thanks, guys.